In the ancient texts of the Bible, there is a story that has been hidden for centuries, a story of divine betrayal, exile, and the forgotten son of Abraham, Ishmael. What if I told you that everything you've been taught about this banishment could be wrong? What if Ishmael's exile was not a punishment, but a divine promise woven into the very fabric of human history? For years, this tale has been cloaked in mystery. But today we are about to uncover the truth that Yahweh never meant for you to forget. Why was Ishmael, the firstborn of Abraham, cast out into the wilderness by the very God who had promised to bless him? Could there be a deeper reason behind his banishment? One that challenges the very narrative of Yahweh's covenant and the Anunnaki's influence over the world? Have the forbidden knowledge and ancient Sumerian gods truly shaped the events of Genesis in ways we are only beginning to understand? In this video, you will learn the startling connections between the Anunnaki, Ishmael, and the ancient biblical revelations that have been hidden away. We will dive deep into the cosmic battle of divine counsels, revealing how Ishmael's journey was not just one of exile, but of divine election and grace, a grace that extends beyond the boundaries of the chosen people. You'll gain insight into how Genesis was influenced by ancient stories like the Enuma Elish, and how Ishmael's line was meant to spread blessings to nations far beyond Israel. Stay with us as we uncover the mystery of Ishmael's banishment, a story lost in the sands of time, and how the answers lie within the ancient texts of both the Bible and the Anunnaki archives. This is a journey you won't want to miss. Comment below and share your thoughts. What do you think about Ishmael's role in God's divine plan? Don't forget to subscribe and like to stay updated on the truth that has been waiting for you. The moment we open the sacred texts, particularly the story of Ishmael, we find ourselves at the crossroads of divine mystery and human understanding. It is a moment that echoes through the ages, one that continues to stir questions in the hearts of those who dare to look deeper. Ishmael, the son of Abraham, is often remembered as the one cast out into the wilderness, the one whose legacy seemed overshadowed by his younger brother, Isaac. But what if there is more to his story than we have been led to believe? What if Ishmael's exile was not an act of divine rejection, but rather a divine promise, woven into the tapestry of history, a promise of grace and blessing far wider than we could ever imagine? To truly understand the depth of Ishmael's journey, we must first explore the very nature of divine grace. Yahweh, in his infinite wisdom, did not simply choose one line to bless and discard the other. No, his plan is far grander, a plan that stretches beyond human comprehension. We are taught that Ishmael was banished, yet what if that banishment was not a curse, but the very key to understanding God's love for all nations? The divine counsel, as recorded in the ancient texts, reveals a God who sees beyond the confines of borders, a God whose mercy extends far and wide. Ishmael, though exiled, was not forsaken. He was blessed with the promise of becoming a great nation, a promise that would echo through time, reaching far beyond the descendants of Abraham and Isaac. The ancient world, with its vast and intricate web of stories, reveals striking similarities between the Sumerian gods, the Anunnaki, and the biblical narrative of creation and divine counsel. It is in these echoes that we find the hidden truths of Ishmael's exile. The story of the Anunnaki, who were believed to rule the heavens and the earth, mirrors the biblical portrayal of a divine council in which powers beyond our comprehension shape the destinies of nations. The Anunnaki were not just gods, they were figures who controlled the flow of divine knowledge, just as Yahweh in the Bible is portrayed as sovereign over all creation. What many fail to see is that these ancient stories are not opposing forces but reflections of a greater cosmic plan. In the Bible, we read that Yahweh gave Abraham the promise of a land for his descendants. Yet the story of Ishmael complicates this promise. For while Isaac became the inheritor of this divine covenant, Ishmael was sent away, seemingly left to wander in the wilderness. But as we dive deeper into the story, we begin to understand that Ishmael's journey was never meant to be one of complete abandonment. Even in the wilderness, God heard the cries of Hagar, Ishmael's mother, and provided them with a well of water to sustain them. This act of mercy, God opening her eyes to the well, reveals the profound grace of God, a grace that does not discriminate, a grace that hears the cries of those in exile and extends blessings to those whom the world has forgotten. This moment in the desert is not merely about survival. It is about the presence of God's grace even in the most desolate places. The desert, a place of emptiness and harshness, becomes the setting for the revelation of God's mercy. It is in these moments of exile, when all seems lost, that the grace of God shines brightest. Ishmael, though not the chosen son of Abraham, was never forsaken. The divine promise to him was not one of inheritance of the land, but of a future filled with nations. His descendants would scatter across the world, carrying with them the legacy of their father, a legacy of divine hearing and mercy. The well that was revealed to Hagar was not just a source of physical life, but a symbol of the spiritual life that flows through all who trust in God's provision, even when it is hidden from sight. There is a profound lesson here. Often in life, we find ourselves in situations where we feel abandoned or forgotten, much like Ishmael and his mother, Hagar. We may feel as though we are walking through a desert with no clear direction, no source of comfort, no hope in sight. But just as God heard Hagar's cries, he hears ours as well. In those moments of darkness, we may not see the well of provision right away, but it is there, waiting to be revealed when we least expect it. Ishmael's exile teaches us that even in the wilderness, even in the most desolate of circumstances, God's grace is near. His mercy is not bound by human understanding, nor by the labels we place on others. It is a mercy that transcends time and space, extending to all who call upon his name. This brings us to a key moment of reflection. Why did Ishmael have to be exiled? Why did Yahweh allow such a painful separation between father and son? Could it be that the banishment of Ishmael was not a rejection, but a part of God's larger plan for humanity? Could it be that Ishmael's journey was always meant to reveal the universality of God's mercy and grace? The truth is that Ishmael's story does not stand alone. It is intertwined with the stories of Isaac, Jacob, and even the nations of the world today. The promise to Ishmael was not one of land or dynasty in the same way it was for Isaac, but it was a promise of divine favor. A promise that would be fulfilled through the spread of his descendants, who would one day find their place in the greater narrative of God's redemptive work. As we look at the world today, we see that the legacy of Ishmael and his descendants is still unfolding. The Arab nations, often seen through the lens of conflict and division, carry with them the echoes of a promise made long ago. The very well that sustained Ishmael in the desert is a symbol of the deep spiritual thirst that many still seek to quench today. Ishmael's descendants, like all of us, are part of a greater narrative, one that transcends borders, religions, and cultures. The story of Ishmael's exile is not a story of abandonment, but of divine reconciliation, a reconciliation that is unfolding even now. In these final moments, as we reflect on Ishmael's journey, let us remember that God's grace is not limited by human understanding or expectation. Just as God provided for Ishmael in the wilderness, he is always present, even when we cannot see him. His mercy reaches beyond the edges of what we know, touching every soul, every nation, and every heart. The story of Ishmael is not just about a single man or a single people. It is a story about all of us, a story about the divine grace that surrounds us, even in the wilderness. As we move forward, may we remember the lesson of Ishmael and Hagar, that God hears the cries of those in exile and his grace is always near, even when it seems hidden from sight. Just as the well was revealed to Hagar in her moment of despair, so too can the living water of God's mercy be revealed to us at the perfect time. We are not abandoned. We are never alone in the wilderness. God's grace is with us, even now, offering hope, healing, and redemption for all who are willing to receive it. In understanding Ishmael's exile, we must dive deeper into the spiritual essence of divine mercy and God's promises, especially when we consider the immense significance of the Anunnaki's influence and how it relates to the story of Ishmael. His banishment from the family, the desert journey with Hagar, and the divine provision in the wilderness are not mere historical events. They are living testimonies of God's grace, a grace that exceeds human comprehension. As we reflect upon Ishmael's exile, let us examine what it means for us today. The world often labels situations of abandonment or rejection as failures, as wounds that leave deep scars on the soul. But Ishmael's story teaches us that rejection can be the very gateway to God's grace, where mercy finds us in our weakest moments. It was in the wilderness, under the scorching desert sun, that Ishmael's life was not only saved, but transformed. Hagar, with her broken heart, saw that the water she sought had always been present, hidden by the dust and despair of her circumstances. This revelation is profound. How many of us are wandering through our own deserts today, searching for a well of life, not realizing that it is right in front of us? We chase after fleeting comforts, looking for answers in places that offer no lasting peace. Yet, just as God opened Hagar's eyes to the well that was always there, he calls us to open our eyes to his provision. Ishmael's journey reveals that God's grace is not bound by human limitations. Even in the wilderness, God's mercy is present, offering life where there seems to be none. This brings us to a key truth. God's grace is not bound by our expectations. The Anunnaki's story in the ancient world, though not directly tied to Ishmael, provides an essential backdrop for understanding the bigger picture. The Anunnaki gods, in their own mythologies, represent divine powers controlling knowledge and fate. They were figures who shaped the destinies of humanity, albeit through their own limited lens of power and hierarchy. In contrast, the God of the Bible, Yahweh, is a God of grace and compassion, a God whose love transcends human understanding, a God who hears the cries of the forsaken, the oppressed, and the forgotten. Ishmael, though cast out, was never outside of God's divine plan. His descendants would spread across the earth, carrying with them the blessing of God's promise. And in this, we see a reflection of the universal scope of divine mercy. God's promise was not just for Isaac, the son of Abraham, but for Ishmael as well. His line would become a great nation, just as God promised to Hagar in the wilderness. But here lies a question that many avoid. Why was Ishmael chosen to face this path? Why must he wander in the desert while Isaac received the promise of land and legacy? The answer lies in the greater narrative of grace. Ishmael's story is not about bloodlines or inheritance in the traditional sense. It is about God's ability to bless beyond borders, to extend mercy to those who seem unworthy by human standards. Ishmael's exile was never about exclusion, but about fulfilling a divine purpose in a way that was more profound and far-reaching than anyone could have imagined at the time. In the midst of Ishmael's journey, there is a profound lesson for us today. Many times, we find ourselves in situations that feel like exile. We feel like outsiders, like we don't belong, or like God's favor has passed us by. We might even feel abandoned in the wilderness, like Hagar, with nothing but despair and thirst. But as Ishmael and Hagar discovered, God's grace, is found in the moments when all seems lost. It is in these very moments that God opens our eyes to the wells of living water that have always been there, waiting to quench our deepest thirst. This truth goes beyond religious narratives. It speaks to the deepest places of the human soul. The Anunnaki, with all their power and knowledge, could never offer the same kind of grace that Yahweh offers to his children. Their gods were distant, aloof, and harsh in their judgment. In contrast, Yahweh is a God who comes near, who listens to our cries, who sees our pain, and who provides for us in ways we cannot always understand. The Anunnaki gods might have controlled the world of their time, but they could not offer the same comfort and restoration that comes through God's mercy. Their influence on ancient cultures was real, but their reach was limited. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael is not limited by time, place, or understanding. He is a God of the impossible, a God of the wilderness, and a God of grace, who hears the cries of those who have been cast aside, just as he heard Ishmael in the desert. This brings us to another key revelation. God's grace is a call to reconciliation. When we look at the lives of Isaac and Ishmael, we are reminded that God's family is larger than the one we often imagine. Ishmael's story is not one of rejection, but of reconciliation. Reconciliation between different lines, different nations, and different people. The divine promise that God gave to Abraham extends beyond one son. It extends to all nations. The promise is not confined to one bloodline, but to all who are willing to receive God's mercy. This is why the Anunnaki's influence and the narrative of Ishmael's exile intersect in such a powerful way. The Anunnaki gods ruled with power and dominance, but the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael ruled with mercy and grace. Where the Anunnaki were bound by their need for control, Yahweh was free to love, to bless, and to offer grace to those whom others might deem unworthy. Ishmael, cast into the wilderness, was never outside of God's grace. He was simply part of a larger story of divine reconciliation and mercy. Now, as we turn our attention to the future, we must remember the lessons that Ishmael's exile teaches us. The world may cast us aside, may label us as outsiders, may tell us that we are forgotten. But in the eyes of God, we are never abandoned. God's grace reaches us even in the wilderness, even when we feel alone and lost. It is in these moments of struggle that God opens our eyes to the wells of life that we need most. As we seek understanding in this world, let us remember the story of Ishmael. His life was not about exclusion, but about the expansion of God's mercy to all nations. His journey teaches us that God's love is not confined to a particular group, but is available to all who seek it. And just as Ishmael's descendants went on to shape the world in ways unseen at the time, so too does God's grace shape the world today, calling us all into reconciliation, into mercy, and into a deeper relationship with the one who hears our cries, even in the wilderness. As you reflect on Ishmael's exile, remember that grace is always near. Just as the well was hidden in the desert, so too are the blessings of God's mercy, hidden in our most difficult moments. Trust in the God who hears, who sees, and who provides. And as we walk through the wilderness, may we always remember that God's grace is sufficient for every step of the journey. In the story of Ishmael's exile, there is a profound lesson that echoes throughout time, one that many overlook. God's plan for us is not always immediate, nor is it always obvious, but it is always filled with grace. The divine promise given to Ishmael was never about earthly riches or the lands that his half-brother Isaac would inherit. It was, instead, a promise of legacy, of provision, and of blessing that would touch the lives of nations. Ishmael's exile was a moment in history that would shape the world in ways we could never fully understand at the time. It was not just a rejection, it was a revelation. We must understand that Ishmael's exile speaks to a greater narrative, one that transcends time and human comprehension. God's plan is not limited by the boundaries of covenant, as we might think. The Anunnaki gods, who wielded their power to control destinies, are not the gods of mercy and redemption. They represent the control of knowledge, yet they do not offer the grace that God extends. Yahweh, in his sovereignty, created a path for Ishmael that would stretch far beyond the confines of a single family or bloodline. Ishmael's descendants would become a great nation, spread across the earth, teaching us the expansive nature of divine mercy and grace. Ishmael's exile forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that God's grace is not reserved for the select few. It is not something to be hoarded, but something to be shared freely and abundantly across the entire world. Just as Ishmael was cast into the wilderness, so too are we often placed in situations where we feel lost, alone, and forgotten. But the story of Ishmael reminds us that even when we feel abandoned, God's mercy is ever present. He hears our cries, just as he heard Ishmael's when he lay alone in the desert, gasping for air. In the wilderness, God opened Hagar's eyes to see the well that would save her son. This was no ordinary well. It was a symbol of divine provision, hidden from sight until the moment of desperation. And it is the same with us. In the deserts of our lives, in the times when we are stripped of everything, God's provision is always present. It is in those moments that we are called to see, to look beyond the immediate and into the eternal, to trust that even in our darkest hours, God's grace is at work. We must ask ourselves, as Ishmael did, where is the well in our wilderness? Where is the hidden provision that we cannot see with our natural eyes, but that is waiting for us to receive? This question is not only about survival, it is about spiritual awakening. It is about learning to trust in God's timing and his ability to provide, even when all seems lost. Ishmael's exile teaches us that provision is not always visible, but it is always present. It is also important to reflect on the significance of Ishmael's role in God's plan. Many believe that he was forsaken, that his life had no purpose beyond being an outcast. But this is where we must shift our perspective. Ishmael's journey was never about rejection. It was about inheritance. He was to inherit the blessing of God's mercy, not the land of promise, but something much more valuable, a legacy of nations. The promise to Ishmael was not about material wealth, but about the spread of mercy and grace to the nations that would one day call upon the name of the Lord. When we view Ishmael's exile from this perspective, we begin to understand that God's plan for our lives is not about immediate rewards. It is about the larger purpose he is working in and through us, a purpose that touches the lives of those around us, even when we cannot see it. Ishmael's exile teaches us that God's love extends far beyond our understanding of family or lineage. It touches the nations and the world, bringing mercy and grace to the places we least expect. Now, let us reflect on the journey of Ishmael and his mother, Hagar. Their story is one of pain and suffering, yes, but it is also a story of restoration and healing. Hagar was a woman who had been cast aside, abandoned by her mistress, yet in the desert, God came to her. He did not forsake her in her moment of despair, but instead provided for her and her son. Ishmael, though an outcast, was always within the embrace of God's mercy. God's grace was with him in the desert, just as it is with us in our own deserts today. This is where the lesson of Ishmael's exile becomes deeply personal. The world may cast us aside. People may look at us as failures, as ones who are not part of the family, not part of the plan. But in God's eyes, we are never forsaken. He sees us, hears us, and offers us the same grace he offered Ishmael and Hagar in the wilderness. His provision is not limited to the things we can see. It is a promise that is hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to open our eyes to it. As we move forward in life, let us carry the lesson of Ishmael's exile with us. Let us remember that God's grace is not about what we inherit, but about what we pass on. It is about the legacy of mercy that we leave behind, a mercy that touches the lives of others, just as Ishmael's descendants would go on to shape the world. God's promise to Ishmael was not one of earthly glory, but of divine blessing, a blessing that would extend across generations, far beyond what Ishmael or his mother could have ever imagined. And just as Ishmael found provision in the desert, we too will find God's grace in our own wilderness. The well may be hidden, but it is always there. It is in the places of our greatest despair that we often find the greatest provision. This is the beauty of God's mercy. It is not bound by our understanding, nor is it confined to the places we expect it. It is always available, always waiting, always there for those who are willing to trust and receive. As you reflect on the story of Ishmael, remember that God's grace is far more expansive than we can ever know. It is a grace that reaches the nations, a grace that transcends time and space, a grace that touches the heart of every soul who is willing to receive it. Just as Ishmael was never truly abandoned, neither are we. In our moments of exile, in our wilderness, we can trust that God hears, and He is always ready to open our eyes to the wells of provision that are hidden all around us. May this story of Ishmael inspire you to see beyond your own circumstances, to look for the grace that is already available, and to trust in God's timing. His mercy is always with us, even in the deserts of our lives. As we reflect on the story of Ishmael, it is important to remember that his journey is far from just an ancient tale. It is a living, breathing testimony of God's mercy, grace, and provision that continues to resonate in our lives today. We may not always see the hand of God at work in the desert places, in the moments where we feel cast aside or forgotten, but just like Ishmael and Hagar, we are never truly abandoned. In the deepest valleys of life, in the wilderness where we find ourselves struggling to survive, we can trust that God is there, offering us the well of His grace, waiting for us to open our eyes and receive it. The banishment of Ishmael is not a story of rejection. It is a story of transformation, of divine election, and of a blessing that goes beyond the boundaries of one family or one bloodline. God's promises are not confined to our expectations, and His mercy is not limited by our human understanding. The grace that God offers is for all people, a grace that transcends time and borders, reaching out to us wherever we are, in whatever wilderness we may be walking through. Just as Ishmael's exile was part of a greater divine plan, so too are the challenges and struggles we face today, part of the bigger picture that God is unfolding in our lives. We may not always understand the reason behind our trials, the seasons of silence and loneliness, but there is always a greater purpose at work. It is in these moments that we are invited to trust, to step out in faith, and to open our eyes to the wells of provision that God has hidden along our path. Ishmael's story teaches us that even in the wilderness, God is faithful to provide. His grace is not hidden away from us. It is present, waiting for us to see it, to recognize it, and to receive it. The beautiful thing about Ishmael's journey is that it speaks directly to our own lives. How many of us have found ourselves in situations where we feel like outsiders, cast out of the promises and blessings that others seem to receive so easily? How often do we wonder if God has forgotten about us, if we are too far gone to ever experience His grace in a meaningful way? But Ishmael's story reminds us that God's love and mercy are not for a select few. His grace is for the one who has been cast out, for the one who feels rejected, for the one who thinks they have been abandoned. Just as God heard Ishmael's cry in the desert, He hears ours, and He is always ready to offer us the living water that will satisfy our deepest thirst. As you reflect on this story, I invite you to think about the areas of your own life where you may feel exiled, where you may feel forgotten, where you feel like God is distant. The truth is that God's grace is nearer than we think. It is in the wilderness that we often discover the most beautiful aspects of His provision. Just as Hagar saw the well that was always there, waiting for her to find it, we too have access to the well of God's grace. A grace that is never far from us, even when we feel lost and alone. If this video has brought light into your life, if it has helped you see God's grace more clearly, or if it has reminded you that no one is ever truly abandoned, I encourage you to support this channel in any way you can. Your support helps me to continue sharing these truths, to spread God's love and mercy to those who need to hear it most. Every like, every comment, every moment of engagement is a priceless gift, and I am deeply grateful for each of you who joins me on this journey. Together, we can continue to discover and share the unfathomable grace of God that transforms lives and brings healing to the world. If Ishmael's exile speaks to you, if you see your own life reflected in his journey, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What has God been teaching you through your wilderness moments? What wells of grace have you discovered along your own journey? Share your story in the comments, and let's continue this conversation about how God's grace is at work in all of our lives. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching and for being part of this community. If this video has touched you in any way, I invite you to like and subscribe so that we can continue sharing these powerful messages of hope, healing, and redemption. Your support is a blessing, and together we can make a difference. God bless you, and may His grace continue to surround you always.